Well, good morning and happy International SEL Day to everybody in the audience here today. My name is David Adams. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Urban Assembly, and I am proud to be here for today's theme of Today's Learners, Tomorrow's Leaders. We have a great panel here today for International SEL Day, and we're going to be focusing on the concept of SEL and equity. But before we get to that panel, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. If we can get our sponsors up here, I want to say thank you to our advocate sponsor, Antioch University. We appreciate you supporting social and emotional learning across the world. I want to say thank you to our supporters at Second Step, at Pure Edge, at Harmony Academy and National University. Thank you for supporting social and emotional learning across the world. And thank you to our promoters, Fly 5 and the Responsive Classroom, Ruler at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and Satchel Post. Thank you for supporting social and emotional learning across the world. And to all of the folks in the audience, make sure to visit our SEL Day exhibitors at selday.org/exhibit. Now, we have gone through and thanked our sponsors who have helped us be here today. Let's get to introducing our wonderful panel. The first person I'd like to introduce for us here today is Kamilah Drummond-Forrester, consultant trainer for the National Seed Project and board chair for SEL for Massachusetts. Kamilah, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
The next person I'm going to introduce here is Chi Kim, CEO of Pure Edge and Council board member. Welcome to the conversation, Chi.
Thanks, David.
We have a Dr. Soña Saiz, who is the SEL for New Mexico founding board member. Dr. Saiz, welcome to the conversation.
Good morning, everyone.
And we have Dr. Michael Strambler, PhD, Director at the Child Wellbeing Center at the Education Center and Consultation Center at Yale University. Welcome to the conversation, Dr. Strambler.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, I've taken some time to introduce you guys, but let's take some time for you to introduce yourself. It is SEL Day, so let's think about a feeling word that you're thinking on International SEL Day. Mike, let's start with you. Some feeling words and an introduction, please.
My feeling word would be I'm feeling particularly engaged, really interested and excited to participate in this conversation. It's I think it's one of the bigger topics in the field of SEL right now. It deserves more attention. Do you want me to give more of an introduction here? You gave a great introduction already.
Well, you know, Mike, we have a little bit of time, so let's just hear a little bit about your research, what brings you here today, and we'll get into the conversation as we move through these introductions.
So I'm a psychologist by training. I do school-based research. One of those areas of research is social emotional learning. And in that space, I've done some work in evaluation, trying to understand what are some of the effective components of SEL programs. And lately, I've been giving a lot of attention to SEL implementation and how we can understand that and capture that from a measurement perspective. And so developing surveys and developing observational measures and trying to understand what are the specific elements of implementation that can enhance or detract from the effectiveness of SEL.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. We're going to get into that conversation as we continue. Let me move on to Soña. Soña, if you would introduce yourself, what brings you here on International SEL Day to talk about SEL and equity?
Yes, thank you, David. So I am the behavioral health manager for the New Mexico Public Education Department. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and special education teacher by trade, and have spent the majority of my career in school settings, PK-12 and beyond. And a big piece of my work is social emotional wellness and how to support that in schools throughout New Mexico. So I am very honored to be here. I'm feeling hopeful. I have a feeling that this is a very powerful panel and conversation that we're about to engage in, which takes a lot of courage. So again, very honored to be here. Thank you.
A lot of courage. Today's learners, tomorrow's leaders. So thank you for that, Soña. Chi, let's go to you. What brings you here on International SEL Day to talk about SEL and equity?
Well, first of all, David, everyone knows if you ask, I'm always going to say yes to anything you're a part of. The energy, you just bring it. I think the word that comes to mind for me is just hopeful. And the other one is actually relationships. I think one of the main drivers for what we do at Pure Edge is trying to figure out how we can get resources to young people, learners, and their educators, and really being able to just go inward first to figure out how they can have better relationships and sort of interact in a real positive way. Just a quick plug for Pure Edge. All of our resources are free in multiple languages. Just want to put that out there for you all. And I think just in terms of our work, the background of the reason why I do this is I spent the first half of my career, almost 24 years, teacher and a school administrator. And now we're working on the other side, trying to get resources into the field of K-12 for state agencies and school districts. So it's an honor. David, thank you so much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. And for those who don't know, Chi and I have like an SEL Day date. Every year, we find a reason to come together and talk about what we can do to support social and emotional learning. Kamilah, let's go to you. What's your feeling word, and what brings you to the topic of SEL and equity?
Thanks so much, David. My feeling word is unwavering. I'm feeling unwavering when I think about equity and social emotional learning. My background, I have been a charter school founder here in Boston, Massachusetts. I've been a school administrator. And before I knew that there was a field called SEL, I was always tuned in to the social and emotional well-being of our students. As someone who has done work inside schools, inside prisons, and in the community, I've seen the importance of centering the social and emotional well-being of our children and understand the ways in which larger systems of power and privilege, larger systems of oppression impact the social and emotional well-being of our students in our community. And so the convergence of the two is my sweet spot. That's what I do for consulting with school districts across the country, and have recently been able to collaborate with CASEL to help develop their first adult learning series around transformative SEL. Looking forward to this conversation.
Okay, Melanie, you didn't just collaborate with CASEL. I do believe you received an award from CASEL for your work in social and emotional learning. Tell us about that award before we get to the conversation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I received one of the SEL Leaders of the Year award in November. Quite a surprise, very humbling. And it was specifically around the work I've been doing with linking equity, social justice, and SEL. And so, again, just collaborating with CASEL to develop a learning series for adults, right? Many times we focus on what the students need, and that's important. However, the students can't get what they need if the adults who are charged with supporting them are not getting what they need. And so a lot of my focus is on the adult SEL piece, and was humbled and honored that CASEL acknowledged that.
Well, thank you for your work, Kamilah. And Soña, you talked about this idea of courage. So I want to make sure that we all understand on this panel, we are going to be courageous. We're going to speak truth. If we're having differences of opinions or differences of perspectives, we're going to elevate those tension points so that our audience has the best understanding of how we can move forward in this conversation of SEL and equity. So I want to make sure we're all on board for that. Can I get a head nod?
Absolutely.
All right. We got today's learners, tomorrow's leaders, and today we're going to lead the field of SEL to think about equity. Now, let's start, Mike, with you. I know you just recently published a paper and a book chapter on SEL and equity. Tell me a little bit, what are the tension points that you're seeing in the conversation about SEL and equity? And then we're going to bring in some folks to speak to some of those tension points so we have an ability to think through how to move forward in that space.
Yeah. So SEL right now, with regard to equity, is being squeezed from two political sides. So it's being pushed from the left and it's being pushed from the right. Both have different critiques and concerns expressed around equity. From the right, you have this perspective of SEL being a Trojan horse for leftist ideology, in particular, critical race theory, critical social justice approaches. They feel like equity and equity-based approaches are a way for indoctrinating children into leftist ideology. So that's coming from the right. From the left, you have a perspective that SEL doesn't go far enough in terms of addressing the contextual, cultural concerns around particular ethnic minority and other groups. So you have folks who argue that SEL, if you don't give enough attention to these concerns, can be harmful, or it could be weaponized against these particular groups. And so they sometimes argue for more social justice approaches to SEL, or anti-racism approaches to SEL, or anti-bias approaches to SEL. So those are different perspectives, but both sides feel very strongly about these concerns, and SEL is being squeezed between those two points of view.
Thanks for that overview, Mike. Kamilah, let's go over to you, because this is a space that you've contributed a lot to the conversation. We talk about transformative SEL. We talk about a focus on anti-racist. Mike has taken the time to kind of elevate. On the left, you have people saying, we need to do more of this, less to do damage to kids. On the right, we're saying we're indoctrinating young people. So let me take this over to you. Where do you sit on some of these tension points? And then Chi and Sonia, we're going to talk about a little bit of where you've seen political pressure on both of those sides. Kamilah, let's go to you.
Yeah, I think what immediately comes to mind when I think about this is the fact that when we're talking about social and emotional learning, essentially we're talking about our relationship with ourselves and others, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that be self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, whatever those may be. But the essence of it is the relationship with ourselves and others. Those relationships are developed within a historical context, within a social context, within a political context. To decontextualize SEL is not effective or impactful for all children. And this decontextualization assumes, I think some assume that when you decontextualize some of these historical and social pieces, that it means that it's devoured of culture. Mm. But in fact, what we have found is that culture is still very much permeated in it. And it's primarily the dominant culture, viewpoints and ways of thinking and ways of doing things. And so this idea that SEL that doesn't have an equity lens means that it doesn't include cultural ways of knowing and being is actually false. And so the more that we can ground ourselves in the fact that we build relationships with ourselves and each other within a context. And so all we're saying when we're saying we need to use an equity lens is that we need to bring that context in there. Understand that my self-awareness as a young Black girl or a young Black woman is impacted by the historical and social histories that have gone into and that have spoken to who I am as a female and who I am as a Black person, and many other identities that I hold. And so I think that's really what we're saying when we're saying SEL has to be equity focused or has to have this equity lens, because without doing that, we're assuming that it's there's some kind of universality to it or generalization to it. And in fact, everything that we come to when it comes to some of these SEL skill sets are informed by our cultural context and the historical and social context that we've lived in. We're not doing this in a vacuum.
Sonia, I see you nodding. What's got your resonance moving from what Kamilah talked about?
Well, Kamilah, first off, thank you for providing that context along with you, Mike. I'm learning a lot already this morning. So as far as the political context goes, where I try to center the work is really around well-being and wellness, right? Because I think that to be able to move forward with what our young people need and our teachers, our staff, our administrators is really about, as Kamilah said, a focus on who we are, what we're doing within school settings, what our roles are from students to superintendents. And so that really helps me to be able to communicate with those school leaders the relevance of the work. And as a special education educator and a social worker in schools, this is work I've been doing my entire life in school settings is around social emotional wellness. It's just the title SEL, for whatever reason, and we know language is powerful, right? Has really been, I think, the thing that has brought these two different, the political push from both sides to light, and which can be unfortunate because it really does create this smokescreen around the very relevant work that we've been doing in many different ways since I've been an educator and also been a student in school. So those were my head nods, David, and I'm just I'm learning so much as well, because it really will help me in my work as I move forward.
Well, Soña, we are today's learners, tomorrow's leaders. And in this case, today's learners and today's leaders. And let me talk to Chi, because Chi, you have an international perspective on the work of social emotional development, right? You go across the world thinking about, with Peerage, what social emotional skills and what social emotional learning looks like across the world. How does that perspective inform your thinking about equity and SEL?
Yeah, it's a great question, David. I think one of the things, if I want to just pull back the framing a little bit, for us and what we do, focusing on language is really hard, especially because we are working in red and blue states, we're working internationally. And one of the things that we really try to do is, what's our goal and what's our mission? Our mission is to try and help as many educators as possible so they can help learners and really sort of build that relationship capacity. For us, it's really about focusing on humanity, right? And I think there's these little cues that you can tell when you go into a community where they're either going to be really resistant, you can see it from their body language. I think all of the kinds of ways in which we bring awareness around our surroundings, and all has to do with building a sense of belonging. I think if I had to frame anything of what we really are trying to do is, no matter where we go, no matter which community we serve, and they invite us in, we want to create a sense of belonging. So I think the core of the message really is, how do we connect heart to heart, human to human? I will say the best example I've seen is actually in Harlem, in Dawn Brooks DaCosta, right at T-Malls, which she used to be the principal there. And she really talks about, it's not about othering and hate. It's really about love. How do I actually get to a place where I just love myself? And then when I love myself in the context of the school, how do I love my background? How do I love my own history? How do I love my community? It's a foundational aspect of SEL and equity. It's just all foundational in love and bringing a sense of belonging, that I just worry that this whole shift, the framing, the academic language, and really, frankly, sometimes the jargon that we put ourselves, framed in, we lose the humanity of what we're really trying to do. And it's just being able to be in a space with different people from different backgrounds and being able to have a conversation, being able to listen, and being able to come up with some sort of, perspective taking. And I think that's just the piece that I worry about the most, especially in this election cycle. You just see DEI getting thrown around, equity getting thrown around in a way that they're just like little bombs in places. And you look at academia right now, like there is a group intentionally trying to go through all of the DEI offices across all the university systems. It just becomes a very toxic kind of piece. And so just figure out how we can collectively just think about how we connect as human beings and start to use the language that's much more inclusive, especially in this election year. I just feel like it's going to get politically very, very charged. In a way that none of us intended. And I think really at the core of it, I'm just grateful that I get to be with human beings in contact and in conversation and learn. So I think that part is really important. So that's my perspective, David.
I appreciate that, Chi. And, as you're talking about this notion of connection, I'm reminded about a recent meta-analysis that was conducted over at Yale University with Christina Scipiano. Mike, you helped put this together. And the emphasis or one of the outcomes of social emotional learning was this idea of civic development or civic attitudes. And there was this idea of not only increased perspective taking, but a stronger sense of commitment to the whole and problem solving through community. And I was surprised by this because I thought, when we think about equity, we tend to think about it in a really specific kind of DEI fashion. You were talking about this. But in fact, it looked like some of that research says that students who go through SEL programs are more willing to learn how to work together with other people. So let me turn this over to Mike, and then we'll go to Kamilah again. Tell me a little bit, how close am I on that? Obviously, Mike, you wrote it with Chris, so you probably have a better sense of it. How far am I off of that? And how does this notion of civic development speak to this notion of SEL and equity?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I've been thinking about quite a bit following that meta-analysis that we did. And I think it's connected to some of the things that she mentioned about what the purpose of SEL is from her perspective about connecting with others, respecting others, focused on humanity. And I think that's one of the things that civics and civics education does pretty well. And for some time now, I felt like it's a SEL and civics belong together for that reason. So civics tends to have more of a focus on understanding history for one, but goes beyond that to understanding what it means for us to live together within a society as citizens. So how do we work together? What do we owe each other as citizens? How do we deal with disagreement? How do we debate others? And an appreciation for that kind of debate rather than backing away from it. So civics is very much connected to SEL in the sense that SEL also cares about those things, but has more of a focus on developing skills intrapersonally as well. So in relating this to civics and the topic of debate, for example, when you're debating someone or you're in a discussion with someone who you disagree with, it can evoke a lot of emotions within you. So how do you, first of all, acknowledge and identify those emotions within yourself and regulate them in a way that can lead to a productive conversation with this person that might be stirring up really intense emotions within yourself. So SEL can help with that to better enhance one's ability to have these kinds of conversations, ultimately leading to us as citizens within a society being able to better relate to each other and us being able to be more effective at solving social problems and ultimately having a more effective democracy. So I think these concepts are very much related to each other. I would love to see more of SEL and civics education integrated for those reasons.
I appreciate that's going big here. We're talking about the future of not only our nation, but the world and how we relate to each other. And Kamilah, I heard that same concept when you talked about your focus on identity grounded SEL. How do we relate to ourselves? How do we relate to each other? And it seems that if we're thinking about some of these SEL skills of relationships and perspective taking, we may be able to better equip people to ask or answer this question for themselves. Tell me how you're relating to some of this idea of SEL and civics with regards to how we understand each other in community with each other.
Yeah, love it. Thank you for what you shared, Mike, in full agreement with everything that you shared. I mean, I think what's right back to the notion that SEL is about relationship. When you are engaged in civic activity, you are engaged in relationship building with multiple and diverse members of different communities. And it's sort of a hands-on lesson, right, of SEL. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And thinking specifically about the transformative SEL focal constructs, thinking about curiosity, agency, belonging. You know, when you're involved in civic engagement, you have to lead with a level of curiosity. you go into communities, you go into these civic engagement activities, really asking questions, being open to hearing information that you may or may not know about certain communities or about certain topics that the communities are dealing with. And so curiosity is something that you lead with. And it helps you also to, one of the things that I've been asking folks to do is that when you lean into curiosity, begin that curiosity with self. I think sometimes we're socialized to externalize our inquisitiveness. And where we can gain some ground with our self-awareness, which then supports our relationship skills, is begin to do some self-inquiry, right? Asking ourselves questions around, why is it that I'm getting this feeling when I'm in this community? Why is it that I'm having these thoughts when these people are passing by? Why is it that I'm choosing to ask this question versus that question? Engaging in civic, engaging in some of the civic activities helps us to kind of lean into that piece. And then the other piece is, right, we're activating our agency in those moments. Those activities help us to see the power and the influence that we have, no matter what age we are. And particularly for students, it's powerful, right? That they have a circle of influence that they can enact their agency, which helps to really support their relationship and decision-making, with a variety of people.
I really appreciate that, Kamilah. I believe when we think about schools, and we're going to talk to Soña about this, right? One of the roles of schools is to help young people understand their place in society. So the structures we organize around schools, the way we resolve disagreements in schools, our discipline systems, teach young people a really important idea around who we are and who we want to be, which is why Brown versus Board didn't go after the interstate buses. They went after schools, right? They didn't go after situations of segregation that were prevalent. They went after the foundational institution that teaches Americans about Americans. And so, Soña, you work in schools. This is your thing, right? You work with young people. You see how young people think about resolving disagreements, using your SEL skills to identify and build relationships. What's your understanding of the role that schools can play in elevating the social emotional skills that allow us to be in better community with each other?
That's a powerful question. And I think I want to just expand on what the messaging that I keep hearing in Kamilah's responses, which is about starting with self. So the way that I tend to operate most these days is through a cultural humility lens, which is really about being a lifelong learner, seeking to understand, and holding institutions accountable to do the same. And so I think sometimes where the struggle can be in schools with students specifically, and they may not be able to name this. I know I couldn't at going through schools and feeling this cognitive dissonance, right, around what I know to be or knew to be the role of my education, but then how I was made to feel and not being able to really name that. So if schools, institutions, educational institutions were to really start with themselves with a look at policy and procedure and even the roots of what is the purpose of education, how that developed and where that came from and where we are today in relation to what today's learner needs and 7 generations forward, right? I think that would help tremendously in the work that would get done in this moment and really support what we're trying to engage students in, which is that self-reflection and very the curiosity of the questioning with respect, right? Like that critical thinking about, okay, I'm sitting here in this math class, I'm really struggling, and I have a right to feel this way, that's okay. And what is it that my community who's surrounding me right now here in this classroom do for me, and help them understand how that extends out to their principal, their superintendent, and the policies and procedures that are directly impacting them in that moment.
I appreciate that so deeply, Soña. And as we're thinking about this idea, and Chi, I'm going to come to you on this, right? What is our vision of America? What is our vision of our schools? And what role will social and emotional learning and equity play in that vision? And Chi, you and I talk about this a lot. So let's talk to our audience. What's our vision? How will we be in community in our country and beyond?
Yeah, it's just, a lot of folks just made assumptions about the way, we might be politically and otherwise. But, I'm an immigrant. I came when I was 3 years old. I'm super patriotic, and people are shocked. I love this country. My parents, built this sort of, idea that we were sort of quote unquote let into the country. And, I know it comes with a lot of historical context of, based on sort of hate in terms of the Chinese Exclusion Act and all, if you just build up to how we got in. But I think for me personally, I think the way that why I do this work, why our organizations do the work, I think it's just we want to figure out a way that we can just notice others, build a sense of belonging so that we all have a common purpose to just enhance lives for ourselves, our families, our friends and our communities. But in the end, I feel like the big picture for me is how do we create places and spaces where we just become great connectors of other human beings, that we can think through what's going to be great for my family, but what's also going to be great for our community, and which goes back to, sort of the civics conversation. And at the end of the day, if I'm just going to go put in the context of last night's State of the Union address, right? Watching that, I'm on an airplane flying into Denver. I'm watching it with my headphones on. There's, just humanity on the plane. And I'm watching the screenshots because I could barely hear, but I could see just the screenshots of people's reactions to anything that President Biden was saying, both, positive and negative reactions. And I'm getting visceral responses, and I had to control myself because for me, I just need to take in the information, try to figure out how to manage, okay, I'm going to have certain feelings about what's happening contextually and politically, but what can I do to figure out ways in which in my immediate, interactions, when I leave this place to go to the next meeting, how can I just make sure that we're creating spaces where there's comfort first. I always think that that's the best avenue, comfort first, and what am I going to notice? And I actually feel like we are a society that actually doesn't notice a lot. We think big or we find, but we don't notice little things, right? We've become so used to seeing negativity, seeing hate, seeing all these other things. But when you actually dig down a little bit, like, what do you actually notice? When you're going through the report, do people look like they've been suffering? Just things that if we just hold back a little bit, there are so many things that we notice that it's hard not to have it hit your heart. And I just, I wish we would slow down a little, honestly. If I had to name something, I wish we would just collectively slow down to speed up. I think that part for me, David, you and I talk a lot about just, being worried for our kids. Like, what's this society going to do to our children? And, what kind of world are we bringing? But I'm always hopeful because in the noticing and the slowing down, there are so many beautiful moments that people just sort of bypass. But if you slow down a little bit, connections, the little conversations, especially with people that are very, very different from me, I just, it makes me optimistic and hopeful. And I think just for our future, I just hope that collectively we can, make sure that our local community, our civics engagement, our country does well, that our international partners do well. I think we're at this moment where we have to choose. We have to choose between humanity or choose between hate. And I think right now, I'm going to choose humanity always. But, it's that moment where I feel like SEL, equity, the lens, whatever you want to call it. I just think it's a grounding of noticing and building these relationships, as Kamilah has talked about very intently.
Thank you, Chi. And you talk about this idea of the individual and collective. And I think that tends to be the the tension point as we try to make society as fair as possible. How do we balance the individual and the collective, right? And I want to take that same question to Kamilah and to Mike with regards of like, what is your vision for the future of our country with regards to social and emotional learning and equity? How will we be in community? Let's go to Kamilah.
So much of what she said just resonated so deeply with me. We need to practice what it looks like disagreeing with one another while still centering our humanity. Currently, our children are not getting enough examples of how you can be in conversation with someone who has different experiences than you and still honor the shared humanity. And so the more we can lean into that as the adults in the space, I think that's important. And so again, this idea of curiosity and open-heartedness helps us to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. Practices like reflection and storytelling, I have found to be potent interrupters and incomparable humanizers. When we think about education, when we think about what's happening on a global scale, there is a rehumanization that needs to happen. And zeroing in on some of these transformative SEL skills and constructs can really support this rehumanization process that we need to go through. Whether it be our kids all of us, not just the kids, overindulging in technology and not connecting in the, on a in-person basis, whether it be, because you look different than me or talk different than me or come from a different place. Now, for some reason, you're not like me or I don't want to have a relationship with you. Like, SEL has the power to really help our communities and our world to center belonging and to center our shared humanity. And do it in a way that is contextualized, do it in a way that is curious, and do it in a way that really activates all of our agency to be able to influence our various circles of influence. No matter who we are, no matter what our roles, all of us have a circle of influence that we can tap into and create ripple effects that centers love. I'm going to say the word, centers love, centers humanity, and centers our collective well-being.
Thank you, Kamilah.
One last thing I just want to say, we need to get to a place where Ubuntu is the spirit that we're dealing with. I am because you are. If you are not free, if you are not well, then I can't be fully well either.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Mike, and then Soña, your vision for SEL and equity in our country and the world.
I'm all for centering humanity, humanism, as other folks have said. I think that there are some tensions within the field right now that we really need to give more attention to and figuring out how we can resolve them. I think so. I'll just give maybe one example here, and this might actually lead to an interesting conversation where we maybe have some disagreements on some of these things. One tension, for example, that I've been concerned about is the tension between centering and inclusion. So there's a notion that because certain marginalized groups have been because of their history of marginalization, we need to center SEL approaches on these particular groups. So we need to organize some of the instruction, organize some of the practices around supporting these particular groups. Now, it doesn't really matter, and doesn't really matter what the group is, but that's the notion of centering. Now that, in a sense, the more you do that, the more you lean into that, the less inclusive you're going to be of other groups that exist within your community. So that's a concern that I think that we need to give attention to within the SEL field. And the other concern, I think, is this tension between skill development and social justice efforts activity towards making a society more just. There will be some who will say, I'm more of a skills advocate, who say that if you want to provide more opportunity for folks, you need to provide them with the skills to thrive in a modern society. And then others who say that, well, that's not enough. You need to help them develop the skills to push back against an oppressive system. So that's another tension that I think we need to address. And I think these things strain our efforts to focus on humanity, because I think to some, it going in one direction versus the other means you're giving more explicit attention to one group to the exclusion of another. So just pointing out a couple of things that I think we need to spend more time thinking about, addressing, acknowledging within the field. And then the last thing I think would be that what we mean by equity when we're talking about it. Some believe in equity as a focus on equal opportunity. I'm a proponent of that perspective. Others view equity as focused on producing equal outcomes among groups.
Thank you, Mike. And so you raised some really important points. And before we get to you, Soña, I just want to recap some of the tensions that you elevated, right? One was the centering versus an inclusive. How universal are social emotional concepts? And I think that's a question that we need to think through. You talked about this tension point between skill development that's relatively neutral, using your relationship skills to do whatever you want, and being more intentional around using your relationship skills to deconstruct oppressive outcomes. One of them is more neutral, one of them is more directed. And then lastly, you talked about this question of when we say SEL and equity, where do we see equity being? What is this as a question around our vision? Like, what does it mean to be equitable? Is it equal outcomes that we're all in the same space, or more equalized opportunities where we're giving people the same opportunity to achieve their potential across our nation and the world? So I'm going to turn this over to you. How does some of Mike's tension points live in your thinking and or in the work that you've done?
Mike, thank you, first of all. So recently I was introduced to the concept of the curb effect. And I don't know if you all are familiar, and I hope I don't get it wrong, but basically it was when street curbs were made to be more of like, easier to be able to get up onto, right? Like they went from being these like blocks to more of a curve, right? And not as much distance between the ground and the curb. And that was for people in wheelchairs. But what wound up happening is that it benefited so many more individuals when, like, a mom with a stroller, right? Or somebody who has maybe a different type of physical disability that just made it easier to get onto the curb. So, yeah, if we consider centering and how and going more to this idea of a curb effect and considering who is on the margins of whatever it is that we're trying to work towards as far as equity goes, we could likely, like, it's not then being exclusive. We're also considering everybody else, right? But we're trying to work towards who's on the margins to be able to create this idea of equity to access whatever it is that individual is needing. Mm-hmm. So I want to learn more about that and how to focus and center my work more in that way so that I'm not being exclusive, because I agree, Mike, that happens, right? I also appreciated this idea about skills-based versus equity-based. I don't think they need to be separate. I first learned as an individual, learning about like emotional intelligence and how that then led into social emotional learning. I was working very hard on skills for myself individually, and then sharing that with my students at the time, right? when this idea of like transformative SEL came into play, I was like, okay, it's about naming, right? I was already engaging in that work for myself and with others around how does my identity come into play? And when I'm being asked to, or when I'm being encouraged or supported around self-reflection, that should also, and self-management and responsible decision-making, that onus just isn't on me as an individual. That's also connected to things that are going on in my setting, like in my community, in a school setting specifically, right? Like, if I'm being asked and I'm being supported around self-reflection and self-management and responsible decision-making and relationship building and social awareness, in my mind, the expectation is also that that's happening in where I live and where I breathe, and that my identity is being considered and honored, right? Like, if my way of knowing to self-manage is by, listening to folklore music, and I should be allowed to do that, right? Like, I should have this opportunity. And it's just these little, very, I think this is one of the challenging things around all of the issues that Mike outlined, is that there's these nuances that are very hard to quantify and measure and whatnot, but it's happening and it's relevant. And I think listening to people as we're engaging them in the skill building, like really asking kids, well, what happens at home when you are really experiencing a big emotion? Like, how does that, like, help me understand that, right? Mm-hmm. And then identifying the strength in that and where maybe that young person could benefit from more of a skill-based curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Soña, I really appreciate your elevating some of the nuances and tension points here. We got about 2 minutes left, folks. And so we're going to do a lightning round, right? With regards to understanding our SEL and equity vision. So let me hop over to Chi. Chi, I want you to tell me in 5 words, right? In 5 words, we're going to count. What is our vision for SEL and equity? We're going to do it together. Ready?
Oh, boy. Humanity connection for all people.
Humanity connection for all people. Thank you for playing our lightning round game. Mike, over to you. Your vision for SEL and equity in 5 words or less.
Humanism, skills, opportunity, civic friendship. I'll do
skills, opportunity, and civic friendship. Mike, thank you for playing. Nice job. 1 minute. Kamilah, hit us up. 5 words or less.
Oh my goodness. Collective humanity for belonging. Let's say that.
All right. Collective humanity for belonging. What was that last phase?
Belonging for all.
For all. I love it. Thank you. Soña, 5 words or less. Our vision for SEL and equity. Go. She's ready. She go.
Well-being, humanity, and self-reflection, love.
It's well-being, humanity, self-reflection, love. Listen, folks, this is our kickoff conversation today for SEL Day, which is today's learners, tomorrow's leaders. I will tell you that today's learners will have to consider ideas of equity if there are going to be tomorrow's leaders. And I do believe that by incorporating social and emotional skill development, our young people will be better off in order to think about how to navigate through that common good, identify who the people are, and improve our nation and our world. On behalf of the Urban Assembly, on behalf of SEL for US and 6 Seconds, I want to thank you for kicking off our panel on SEL Day 2024. Have a wonderful day.